Today's presentation is going to be looking at how to insert a text box and choose a font for your presentation. So we've already talked about how to choose a theme. Simple is better. We've talked about finding images you can use, so Creative Commons from Pixabay, and we've talked about enlarging them so that you have a really solid image that has no pixelation. Now we're going to have to insert text because the text is going to help our presentation, remind people of key points, and also the text is going to have to be readable for our audience. So there's our basic slide. Now we need to add text to it. Because we're going with a blank slide, there's no pre-designated spot where we have to put the text. This is good because it frees us up to move the text around and use the focal points created by our image. When I look at this image, I notice that the girl is pointing, and that to me creates an obvious place to put my text box right where she's pointing to. That means my audience's eyes are drawn to that, and it reinforces the importance of that text. So I'm going to just create a text box. I'm not going to bother with any of the other stuff, and I'm going to guesstimate that I want it about there. I can always move this around later. And you'll notice that her fingers are pointing to wherever this text box is currently set. Now we have to choose what size of font and what font we're going to use. You'll notice that PowerPoint, mine for some reason, chooses Calibri as its body font, and it uses an 18-point font. Well, I'm going to try that and see what happens when we go with that. Come on. Alright, so there's my text box. Present your ideas simply. That's okay. It's nice and clean. It's located fairly well, but it is kind of lost on the screen and it's a bit small. So I already know that that's going to need to be bigger for my audience. If I stand back about 3 feet or 4 feet from my screen, I'm going to have trouble reading that. That means that an audience who's sitting 10, 15, 20 feet away from the screen when I'm projecting is going to have trouble reading it. So I really want to make sure that my audience has the easiest time possible reading this. And that means I need to increase the size of this text. So I'm just going to go to the home page and I'm going to see about maybe 36-point font. Okay, that's a lot larger. That's going to be a lot easier to read. We may even want to increase that a little bit more. At this point, really, you're learning for yourself what works for your presentation and your slide deck, and thinking about your message and the way you're going to present. You're going to have to practice this and try it with projectors and so on to find out what works for you and your audience. And that's probably the most important takeaway. You're creating this not for yourself. You're creating it for an audience, and everything you put on the slide, and especially your text, you have to think about what does it look like for the audience, and how is what you're doing making it easier for the audience to read. So let's imagine that this 36-point font is going to work, and it doesn't look bad. Sort of nice location there. You might think, well, I'd like to have this all on one line. Especially if you had 3 words on one line and 1 word on another, you might want to group that. But as a little block here, that's nicely symmetrical. All right, now let's talk about font. Calibri is what's called a sans serif font. Now I'm going to back out here and just give you a quick lesson in the different types of fonts. Basically 2 fonts, the serif and the sans serif. A sans serif font is a font that doesn't have these little curly cues or these little added bits on them. Now these were originally brought out or became popular in the early days of computers when screens didn't have the resolution or were slow to render images because text is a form of image. And so sans serif fonts would render more quickly and more effectively. Often the serif was lost. They're okay, they're perfectly fine. In fact, they're probably the most common on the computers. You can look this article up on Wikipedia as well. However, a lot of people find that having the serif makes distinguishing between some letters, especially the B, D, T, I's, and so on, a little bit easier than having the sans serif letter, where it's not that you're guessing, but it's some of the differences can be obscured. So one of the choices you're going to have to make when you're thinking about this is, do you want sans serif or do you want serif? Personally, I like the serif forms. I like a serif text. I'm rather partial to where are we here? I'm rather partial to text like copperplate. And I'm also partial to things like schoolbook. You'll notice that it does change the imagery of the slide. Often when you change a font, it make it a little bit bigger, it make it a little bit smaller. That has to do with the effect of the serif on the spacing in the letters. Some people think a serif is more elegant and a sans serif is more simple. This is a matter of your personal opinion and your personal preference, but it is something you're going to need to think about and practice with. If you want some more information about how to choose fonts or pair fonts, you might take a look at Canva. It's a design site, and they have what are called tutorials, Canva tutorials, that talk about choosing pictures, setting pictures, but also choosing and pairing fonts up to make good effects. Sometimes maybe you want to have a serif font for headings and subheadings and a sans serif for something else. So there it is. There's my message. What I'd like you to take away from this is keep it simple. Plan where you're putting your text boxes. Play with them, move them around so that you can see how they look in relation to the image. Make sure that the image directs our attention to the text box and that everything is nicely readable. You can easily imagine with the current image, if I move the text box over too much, I might, come on, move text box. I might, if I put it in there, you can't read any of the message. So you do want to make sure that you keep your text box so that it supports. Come on, text box, move for me. So that it actually makes your image clearer rather than less clear. There we go. All right. That's me done. I'm hoping this has been a valuable lesson for you.